Hi everyone, and welcome to Truth Over News. There have been a number of new developments in the past week relating to Joe Biden's involvement in Hunter's overseas business dealings, particularly those involving Ukraine. Last week, Senator Grassley released the FBI's FD 1023 containing the allegations that both Bidens had been bribed by the owner of Ukrainian energy company Burisma. The document, which had long been hidden from public view, was absolutely damning. This past Monday, two more significant pieces of information were made public. It was reported that FBI agents had told David Weiss and the Delaware U.S. Attorney's Office that they had already corroborated multiple details contained in that FD 1023. Meanwhile, the New York Post reported that Hunter Biden had put his father, then Vice President Joe Biden, on the phone with his business associates at least 24 times. It was the Post's article that Joe Biden had been involved in at least 24 phone calls with Hunter's business associates that made the biggest splash, and for good reason. According to the Post, Hunter would dial in his father on speakerphone into meetings with his overseas business partners or with prospective business partners. It was the details surrounding these many phone calls that Hunter's ex-partner, Devon Archer, was reportedly prepared to testify about before the House Oversight Committee. But in a last-minute development that surprised almost no one, Archer failed for a third consecutive time to show up for his testimony before the Congressional Committee. Archer's lawyer issued a statement later the same day that appeared to be more of a negotiating ploy with Joe and Hunter Biden than a promise to appear next week. The Post placed special focus on one specific call that took place on December 4, 2015, while Hunter and Archer were together in Dubai following a board meeting of Burisma. After a dinner with the Burisma board, Archer and Hunter traveled to the Four Seasons Resort to have drinks with one of Hunter's friends. It was at this point that Vadim Bazarski, the CFO of Burisma, called and told them that Burisma's owner, Mykola Zlochevsky, needed to speak to Hunter urgently. According to the Post, both Bazarski and Zlochevsky met Hunter and Archer at the Four Seasons bar, where Bazarski reportedly asked Hunter, "Can you ring your dad?" The Post took pains to note that at that time it was early afternoon Friday in Washington, D.C. Hunter dutifully called his father, put him on speaker, and introduced the Burisma executives to Joe Biden as Nikolai and Vadim. The date of December 4th immediately got the attention of ourselves and a few of our fellow researchers. Why did the Ukrainians need to speak to Joe Biden at this specific point in time? Keep in mind that this conference call came shortly after Joe Biden made his first demand to Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko that the prosecutor on the Burisma case, Viktor Shokin, be fired. Now, we already knew that Joe Biden was scheduled for a trip to Ukraine in a few days' time. We also knew that Blue Star Strategies, the firm that Burisma recently hired at Hunter's urging, was conveying the details of Joe Biden's upcoming trip to Hunter, Archer, and other members of their firm, Rosemont Seneca. And they were including the senior Burisma executives in their communications. Notably, it was during this trip to Ukraine that Biden leveraged that $1 billion in U.S. taxpayer loan guarantees to force Shokin's removal. It took us just a few minutes of digging through our timelines to realize that the urgent conference call took place just as the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times were ramping up their investigations into Hunter and Joe Biden's relationship with Burisma. Late on December 4th, likely after that conference call with Joe Biden, there was a flurry of emails regarding pending stories from both publications. The emails focused primarily on draft and responses to both media outlets. One email noted that the collective advice is that we not give them a quote from Hunter. The same email also noted Burisma's website should post a statement that was forward-thinking and not directly responsive to any allegations that may be made against MK. MK, of course, stands for Mykola Zlochevsky, the owner of Burisma. The statement that they came up with claimed that Hunter had joined Burisma to strengthen corporate governance and transparency. In other words, the now laughable claim was that Hunter was there to reduce corruption. Based on the emails, it appears that Burisma, Hunter, and their advisors were originally more concerned over the journal's efforts than they were over the pending article from the Times. The Wall Street Journal article was published on December 7th. The New York Times published their article the following day. The articles were likely uncomfortable for the Bidens, drawing national attention to Hunter's relationship with Zlochevsky, who was being investigated at the time, but they also didn't do any real damage. In response to issues of credibility that were raised, Joe Biden's spokesperson shamelessly echoed Hunter's transparency claims and highlighted Joe's speech in Ukraine against corruption. The actions of both Bidens were wholly altruistic, designed to bring transparency and oversight to a country long plagued by corruption. Come on, man. Meanwhile, the political heat from the articles didn't stop Joe Biden from using taxpayer money to force Poroshenko to get rid of the Ukrainian prosecutor investigating Burisma. There's also an interesting side note to this story that may have set the stage for events that were shortly to come. Both articles referenced a September 2015 speech by the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, Jeffrey Pyatts. In that speech, Pyatts brought up the UK's 2014 investigation into Zlochevsky and how it was the Ukrainian prosecutor who ultimately thwarted that investigation. But Pyatts appears to have intentionally conflated that prosecutor, Vitaly Yarema, with Viktor Shokin, the man Biden would soon get fired. It was Yarema who told the UK court that there was no case against Zlochevsky, not Shokin. Shokin became the prosecutor only after Yarema was forced out. But that speech from Pyatts became an integral part of the public narrative that Shokin was corrupt. And Pyatts had to know what he was saying. After all, it was Pyatts who, just 3 months earlier, had hand-delivered a letter to Shokin from Victoria Nuland, stating that we have been impressed with the ambitious reform and anti-corruption agenda of your government. Incredibly, Pyatts later emailed Nuland on December 6th, mocking pre-publication questions from the New York Times regarding his speech the day after Hunter and his team had responded to the release of both articles. We'd also like to add a little additional framework around the new revelations from the recently released FD 1023. As it turns out, the 1023, alleging that Joe and Hunter Biden were paid $5 million each, was not entirely invalidated. Some of the information had already been corroborated by the FBI. After the June 2020 interview with the CHS, the Pittsburgh FBI office obtained travel records for the CHS. And surprise, surprise, it turns out that those records confirmed the CHS had indeed traveled to the places detailed in the 1023 during the time that he said he did. The trips included a late 2015 or early 2016 visit to Kiev, a 2016 trip to Vienna, and visits to London in 2019. The CHS's handler also corroborated the CHS's claim that he had met with Ukrainian official Alexander Ostapenko at the time he claimed that he had. The Pittsburgh FBI agent said the FD 1023 seemed credible and that it merited further investigation. They also told all of this to David Weiss, the Delaware U.S. attorney conducting the Hunter Biden investigation.